we've run out of gas in this Ferrari, so we have to push the car. As a high school automotive enthusiast, I tried everything I could to get behind the wheel of the cars that I had dreamt about and read about in all the magazines, and at the time the only real option was to test drive them. And I would set up alerts on eBay and Auto Trader and go around to all the dealerships if anything showed up for sale near me. And at the time, 2002, 3, 4, there weren't that many exotic cars, and if somebody had one for sale, they weren't going to get that many leads either. But there were these three guys that locally owned the Kia dealership, the Mitsubishi dealership, and the Toyota dealership in our town about 45 minutes northeast of Atlanta. And periodically they would sell some of the cars. One of the guys had a Z8, one guy had a 360 Spider, and another guy had a 2002 Maserati Spider Cambia Corsa. And while we know now those are kind of not the greatest cars, back then it was the latest, greatest, coolest thing, and I was very excited to have the chance to test drive one. So when it popped up for sale on the Mitsubishi lot, I went up there, and it was right after the Evo had come to the US, and they had a 993 Porsche, and I test drove those, but then I said, hey, that Maserati looks pretty interesting. I'd like to take a look at that. And the sales guy was obviously really excited about the prospect of selling his boss's Maserati, so he was pleased to pull it out and we took it for a test drive. And as we're driving around, this was really the first sequential manual car that I'd ever driven, and I was curious how it all worked, and I really wondered, could I force it into first gear when that was really too low of a gear for the circumstance? And we're coming into a right-hand bend at probably 50 miles an hour, and I start braking down and I pull it 3 times to get it into first gear, kind of in the middle of the corner. Terrible mistake. Awful way to drive a car, and I don't know what I'm doing and don't have any driving skill whatsoever at the time. And as we go through the turn, it just completely lights up the rear wheels and we start to oversteer towards the grill of a gigantic Ford F-350 truck. And the ghost-faced sales guy to my right is terrified at the prospect of this kid that he's just let drive this Maserati crashing his boss's car into the front of a Ford truck. And somehow, through no driving skill that I've got, I managed to right it almost perfectly. And we slide out and correct without overcorrecting right into the lane and proceed to the next stop sign as undramatically as one could given how badly the situation began. And this guy is both freaked out, heavy breathing, not exactly sure what's going on, and he kind of thanks me for my interest and enthusiasm in testing out the car, but asks that we drive it back to the dealership a little bit more cautiously. So after you would leave, the sales guys would call you and say, hey, are you still interested in this car? And the Maserati guy kept calling, and I just was making up different excuses. I said, with all that oversteer and the strange handling, I think I want to find one that has the skyhook suspension. And that would mean that it has a sport button on the center console, and all it would really do is tighten the dampeners a little bit and speed up the shifting. And he said, well, how do I know if mine has skyhook? And I said, well, it would have a sport button there. And he said, well, give me 5 minutes, I'm going to check. So he runs out to the car and calls me back and says, guess what? It does have the skyhook. I said, well, we might need to test drive this thing again. So I went back the next day and test drove the car again in all sorts of different environments. And as usual, I took the car back and made some excuse as to why I didn't want to buy it. But a couple months later, I got an eBay alert during one of my morning classes, and I called on my Nokia changeable faceplate snake phone and told the receptionist at the Toyota dealer that I was interested in the 360 Spider that they had listed for sale, and I'd like to set up a test drive at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And she was very excited. She said, great, I'll put you with the general manager. Show up at 3, we'll be ready for you. So I show up, and the whole crowd at the dealership is kind of like, who's coming to buy the boss's Ferrari? And the GM walks out, and it's not his car, it's his partner's car, but he says, yeah, let's take it out for a drive. And we were getting to talking about my idea for the rental company and the albino iguanas and everything else that's going on. And he's kind of perplexed by this kid that's out talking about this weird stuff and test driving this Ferrari. And it turned out that he actually was the partner that owned the Maserati. And he had not forgotten about the kid that came in and did 2 crazy test drives in his car and ended up not buying it. And obviously that kind of got awkward for a moment, but I just explained, yeah, I decided I really wanted the real thing, not just the Ferrari motor in a Maserati. I wanted a real Ferrari. So this seems a lot better, and we're driving it and having a blast and go 20 or 30 miles up the highway and eventually do turn around. And I start to notice we are very low on gas, and I'm not interested in doing anything that's going to stop me from driving this car. And so we just kind of keep going, and I'm watching the bars just, and they start to eventually flash. And about 200 feet prior to getting back to the dealership, it cuts out. We've run out of gas in this Ferrari. So we have to push the car the last 200 feet into the dealership lot. So I thanked them for the test drive and told them I had some place to be and that I would call them and let them know of my continued interest in the car. And at the time, I mean, the thing must have been 300 grand, probably 100 over MSRP, because you just could not get a 360 Spider. And I would do this all the time, but I understand now that this was not the most upstanding way to get behind the wheel of exotic cars. And today it's not that easy. I mean, obviously, anytime you advertise a car for sale, you get bombarded by unqualified leads of people who want to come out and test drive it. And so what you have to do is qualify people more. So the salespeople at exotic car dealerships now kind of reserve a test drive for later in the process, and it's not as easy to just go around town test driving whatever you want. But what you have to understand as someone who wants to test drive these cars is that now dealers and manufacturers really do want you to get behind the wheel of the cars and experience them to kind of foster that attitude of enthusiasm. And they may want it to seem exclusive and kind of with this veil of unobtainium to it, but they really want you to have these chances to kind of familiarize yourself and continue to have the goal of buying one, or go ahead and buy one now. So if you look around for events, there's constantly ways that you can test drive some amazing cars for free, generally with no risk at all. In fact, most manufacturers allocate a fleet of vehicles for you to drive, and they'll be at dealer events or auto shows or other things like that. So you have to keep an ear to the ground and search for things and look for opportunities to drive these cars. You know, before the big city auto shows, most manufacturers will have several cars there with a representative for you to test drive around the local streets to kind of get more of an experience in it. But all the manufacturer sites have ways for you to join their email lists. So if you go on, you'll get invitations to dealer events, product launches, drives at shows like Pebble Beach or Amelia Island or things like that. And in most of the cases, the manufacturers compel the dealers to invite the people that they have generated as leads. So even if you're unqualified, and even if your local dealer knows that, you still might get invitations when they have the press fleet in town, or a driving day, or a track day. Because that's really the holy grail of these driving experiences. Because a couple weeks ago, I got invited to the Audi Sports Car Experience. They've been doing this for several months at Atlanta Motorsports Park, and there's only 4 slots each day to drive the cars. So if you know someone at the manufacturer, or if you contact a dealer and express some interest, in this circumstance, they had a TTRS, an RS3, and an R8 V10 Plus that 2 of us and 3 instructors got to mess around with on a private track all morning. And so we got to take the cars out and really put them through their paces. And I knew the instructor through some mutual connections. And after we had test driven it, he said, you know, this is about 30 or 40% faster than we usually go in these cars, but I appreciate that you seem safe and know what you're doing. So by all means, have some fun. So we took out the RS3 and really pushed it hard, and then took out the R8 and had a blast. But it was an awesome experience, and these events are designed to make you love the cars, so they're gonna be a ton of fun. But we used to do events like that with McLaren all the time, and Lamborghini at different events like the Masters and stuff like that. There would be fleets of cars available for people to sign up and drive. So what you've got to do is go out and find how you sign up. So contact your dealers, contact the manufacturers via social media, via their websites, and just say, hey, I'm interested in whatever the car is. When's the best chance for me to really get behind the wheel? And they may send you as a lead to your dealership for more of a qualified test drive, which tends to work, or they may have some awesome event coming up that really gives you a completely different look at the car. So now, fortunately, you don't necessarily have to con your way into doing this. There's a lot of opportunities because all these dealers and manufacturers want to get you behind the wheel of the cars. Like Ferrari dealers have to maintain a couple demo cars. So there's probably a GT4 Lusso at your local Ferrari dealership that they want to put miles on. And if you present yourself as professional and reasonable and qualified and you've got good insurance, they'll probably let you drive it. They might even let you take it for a couple of days because they have to put some miles on it and they need the exposure for the cars and for the brand. So stay in touch with your dealers, stay in touch with your manufacturers, sign up for their mailing lists and make yourself present at all these events, and you're probably going to find an opportunity to experience a car that you've dreamt about a lot sooner than you think you might.